Welcome back into Discern. I'm Ross, and once again joined by my friend Mark Turman at the Denison Forum. Hello, Mark.
Hey, Ross. Glad to be a part of the conversation today.
We've been talking this week about the concept of poverty, and one of the recent news headlines is centered around the child tax credit. As of shooting this, we're in the midst of what's coming up to be tax season, some changes in tax policy, and really through the COVID experience, these tax credits have been pretty significant, tied to President Biden's policies. This article we're going to discuss today is from Esquire. In January, 3.7 million American children fell into poverty. This was tied to the expiration of the beefed-up child tax credit at the turn of the year. The expansion, which upped monthly payments to parents from $2,000 per kid to $3,000, and then $3,600 for kids under age 6, was part of the American Rescue Plan that congressional Democrats passed in March 2021. The program cut child poverty in America by about 30% over its 6-month span. And so, Mark, what we're seeing now is, this is not surprising, but there's now an uptick in poverty now that credit has expired. Again, to rehash, payments were going out, I think, July through December. And so there was an alleviation of child poverty. And then here in January, we're seeing this uptick right again. And the conversation about how much the government should invest in child poverty is a prominent topic right now.
Yeah, and I think something we all ought to be concerned about. Obviously, we have a lot of complex issues in a country our size with, more than 330 million people, and so many of them being children, and so much that has gone on in the reality of the pandemic with people not being able to go to work, losing their jobs, facing illness and other types of challenges, children being able to go to school on a consistent basis. I applaud our government for being willing to step in and to try to create some special measures to resource families in this very unusual and unique time that we've been living in. But I think one of the things we all need to realize is the complexity of what it takes to orchestrate an appropriate tax code in our country, to consider the needs of families, to consider the needs of children and others, to look at how that might impact the entire economy. It's not simply, do we care about children? Yes, we do as a country care about children. It really becomes challenging to think about, well, what's the best way that we can help them and their families, especially with the reality that when you do one thing, it often triggers a lot of other ramifications that you may not be expecting.
Yeah, this concept of trade-offs is something that we've discussed before, and it comes up in these conversations because especially when you're making policy, you're usually trading one thing for another. Obviously, it was amazing to be able to provide these benefits to families with children. Well, where's the trade-offs? So the one political viewpoint would be, these are great programs and we do love our kids, but the spending is going to cause inflation, is going to fuel the wrong results that could come alongside good results. And so you that's that viewpoint. The opposing viewpoint would say, yes, but these are our children. These are the future, citizens of this nation, and they're suffering. So shouldn't we feel called to go and take care of them with government funds, maybe at the same level that we do, for example, the elderly through Social Security programs? So there's these kind of viewpoints on how this money should be spent and on which groups and age groups, and it's a complex issue.
It is, and we understand that every person, regardless of their age or their health status, right? We believe every person is made in the image of God and is equally valuable and important to God. And we hopefully all start with that premise, or I believe we should start with that premise. And then when you get into these big economic policy decisions, it's pretty challenging because we are tempted, especially in a democratic republic like we have, we're tempted to think, well, we can just spend money endlessly from the government, that there's no boundary to that. And what we find is when we start moving too far in that direction, as you said, it triggers other economic realities that are not good for other segments of society. But we can't have this idea that we can just print an unlimited amount of money, or we can go as a country into unlimited debt. We seem to adopt that mindset more and more these days. But I think we have to work together. And that's really what's lacking in our society and is reflected in our government as it tries to make policies like this that help children, help families, help the elderly, help others.
Yeah, and I think as I was reading through this article, an example of what makes the conversation complicated is you have a government that's being asked to manage the funds of a nation, and how well do they communicate about the issues? The example the article was giving is when we talk about government spending on military, for example, there's similar conversations. So how much should you spend there? What's the trade-offs when you spend the money there? It sometimes feels like, and I'm not making a political bias statement. What I'm saying is that I feel like that the arguments that one side may apply to this argument, they're not willing to apply to this argument that they have, or this situation. Rather, this argument, they don't apply equally across situations. Well, if we were able to dialogue well together, we should be able to have the same arguments and apply them to all. So when we're talking about government spending, we should be able to look at all of them through those same lenses. But it's a lot of times I see one side go, I don't necessarily want to apply that argument to this because that won't make my point the result that I want.
We have to struggle and battle with these priorities and ask the Spirit of God to show us what should we do right now, what policies would be best. And unfortunately, what is sad in our society too oftentimes is that we don't come together and have confidence in the goodwill of the people who don't see the issues the way we do. We tend to try to make them look bad so as to make our argument look better. And like you said, sometimes we don't apply the same consistent principles across different agendas, across different priorities, because we're just simply interested in winning. And if we would step back and really take some time to build a consensus around it and to understand all of these priorities are important. Children are obviously important. Older people are important. People who can't work because of some kind of illness or disability or other circumstances. Everybody is important. And can we come together to try to do the best we can and realize we may have to change things later on? Kind of like this situation that you just mentioned at the top, that there's certain things that you need to do in the midst of a worldwide pandemic that you wouldn't do in other circumstances. And we need to factor in that context as well.
Yeah, a different article that we referenced from the Jordan Times in a different episode said this, and I agree, quote, "The poor suffer the most in times of crisis because they lack the social capital that protects those who are better off. That makes it imperative for policymakers to address the widening divide between rich and poor and craft adequate safety nets for those most in need." And we see that in those times of crisis, it does not affect everyone equally. And we saw that play out with COVID. So it's a good reminder.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's almost always the case when something is pretty disruptive in our society, within our cultures. It's almost always the under-resourced who suffer the most. And we need to recognize that that's true and be ready to address it.
This has been a good discussion on child poverty, Mark. We're going to continue talking about poverty as we look to the global landscape tomorrow. We'll see everybody back on the next episode of Discern.